Hey, what's up? It's GC Kinsey, here to talk about the one thing that I find most annoying about explaining what asexuality is. If there's anything I've learned about being asexual, it's that one does not simply come out as ace, because most people don't have a clue what that means. So you have to define it for them. The problem is, you can't do that without talking about sex. Sometimes an uncomfortable amount. Especially if the person you're coming out to is someone you just met, someone you know in a professional capacity, or God forbid, someone you're related to. Just to show you what I'm talking about, here's an example of how one of those conversations might go. Hey, so I just wanted to let you know, I'm asexual. Asexual? What's that? It means I'm not sexually attracted to anyone. So you don't date? That's not what I said, but why would you date when you don't even have crushes on anyone? Oh no, crushes are romantic attraction. I'm talking about sexual attraction, different thing. How? Well, romantic attraction is about who you want to date. Sexual attraction is about, who you want to do. Oh my god, why are you making this all about sex? No, I'm ace. I'm literally making nothing about sex. That's the whole point. Never mind. And that's the mild, inoffensive version of how it might happen. Some people tell aces to stop making it all about sex after asking us weirdly invasive clarifying questions. Like whether we've ever tried it with anybody just to make sure, whether we can get horny, or whether we pleasure ourselves. Seriously, who's the one making it all about sex here? There are some people who even try to frame asexuals as groomers. Yes, you heard that right, simply because talking about asexuality requires you to mention sexual attraction, even in the context of a lack thereof. So apparently just trying to educate someone about asexuality makes you creepy or a bad influence. I've linked an article in the description where Safe Schools Alliance UK took this tactic against Girl Guiding, which is an organization kind of similar to Girl Scouts here in the US, after they made a completely innocuous Happy Ace Week post in October of 2021. And it's really mind-boggling to see the twisted logic this article tries to use to paint asexuals as sexual predators. The thing is, it's really difficult for aces to avoid walking right into this pitfall of being told we're making it all about sex because so few people understand what sexual attraction is and is not. So we end up having to tell them how sexual attraction is different from other things that people commonly mix it up with, like sexual behavior, sexual interest, sex favorability, or libido. In fact, I've seen people conflate all those other things with sexual attraction so many times that I made a whole other video just about that. And of course, it's equally important to explain the difference between sexual attraction and other forms of attraction, such as romantic, sensual, alterous, platonic, etc. Orientations are typically framed as who you love. That's why we end up having discussions in the queer community about the right to love each other freely, or catchphrases such as love is love. But that framing doesn't work so well when we're talking about aspec people, those under the asexual and aromantic umbrellas, because the distinction between sexual and romantic attraction is really important when it comes to how our orientations work. Lumping it all together under love doesn't really make sense for us. And side note, this is how arospec folks might also get caught up in this issue of having to talk about sex an uncomfortable amount when explaining how their orientations work, especially if they're aro but not ace and trying to help someone else understand that distinction. I'm demi-romantic ace, and I have unfortunately not yet found a way to get out of mentioning sex when trying to define my orientation for people who've never heard of it before. Although aspec people tend to be some of the most frequent users of the split attraction model, I would imagine this problem also affects other cross-oriented people who aren't ace or aro. For example, I once knew a woman who was romantically attracted exclusively to other women and sexually attracted exclusively to men, aka homoromantic heterosexual, and a lot of people just thought she was bi, but that wasn't quite it. Like, yes, she was attracted to more than one gender, but in completely different ways, so she was actually neither bisexual nor biromantic. But just like with aspec orientations, good luck explaining that without mentioning sex in some way. So why is this a problem? Why do so many aces, myself included, find it annoying to have to talk about sex when we explain our orientations to people? Well, several reasons. The first one is simple. Talking about sex can obviously be uncomfortable for asexual people. Many aces are sex repulsed, and having to go into the particulars of sexual attraction just to come out as ace and be understood can be a really awful experience. In that regard, I feel extremely fortunate that I'm more on the sex favorable end of things. But whether you're sex repulsed or not, it can just feel really odd to have to define terms and explain concepts related to sex, especially if the other person you're talking to is a complete stranger. There's always that fear of, is this person going to sexualize me just because I had to say the words sexual attraction in front of them? Second, many aces find ourselves sharing more personal information than we wanted to when our asexuality is called into question by someone who doesn't understand it. There's so much allonormativity in society that when we come out as ace, it's common for us to face pushback about it. Things like, how can you be ace when you have a partner, when you have children, when you consume or create adult content, when you wear clothes that show so much skin, etc. Which puts us in a position where we're on the defensive and we have to prove that our asexuality is real just to stop getting hounded about it. And when the only way to do that is to go into way too personal detail, something like, why yes, I am asexual and I have a partner, and the way that works is I don't my partner, that can get really awkward really fast. And third, just like I demonstrated in my coming out example at the beginning of this video, a lot of aces get told to stop talking about sex or stop making it all about sex when we explain our asexuality, even though that's clearly the opposite of what we're trying to do. But by the time we've had to delve into all this uncomfortable information about sexual attraction just to bring someone up to a baseline level understanding, it's like they've forgotten that the whole reason we went there in the first place is because we were talking about asexuality. So what can we do about this conundrum? I think the solution is twofold, but unfortunately it goes a lot deeper than something the asexual community can do on its own. To make discussing the nuances of asexuality and all other orientations less awkward, we need to have comprehensive sex education, and we need to get rid of the culture of shame around sex. One of the reasons we don't have good sex ed right now is because of that culture of shame. Without it, talking about sex wouldn't seem so weird, especially in an educational context. But what we have instead is a world where educational systems don't want to tackle the subject of sex with their students, and parents don't want to tackle it with their children, so people are by and large left to educate themselves, which doesn't always work so well, especially when it comes to topics like pleasure or consent or any kind of queerness. So for aces in particular, that means we have to pick up the slack of educating others, even when we would rather be talking about anything else. The culture of shame around sex also lends itself to a culture of fear. The fear that educating people about sex fully and comprehensively will put ideas into their heads that corrupt them and turn them into sexual deviants. So that's where we get a lot of abstinence-only sex ed instead of, just giving people the tools they need to approach sex in a healthy way, and where we get those groomer accusations when we do try to provide good sex ed. The lack of sex ed and the culture of shame around sex are two issues that have to be resolved in tandem because they are so closely interwoven. And that's going to require a shift in social norms and systems that's going to be really difficult to achieve and is not going to happen overnight. If and when that shift happens, it will ultimately benefit everyone, not just aces, especially those who are marginalized around sex in some way. Whether it's queer people who are marginalized for their orientations, sex workers who are marginalized for their careers, promiscuous and celibate people who are marginalized for their behavior, etc. It'll take the pressure off of marginalized people from having to do all the work of educating others about us. So when we come out as ace, we won't have to explain what that means anymore because the other person would have learned about asexuality in sex ed. And if they do have any follow-up questions, they'll be better equipped to ask them in a respectful way that doesn't make aces feel so awkward about answering them. But of course, that's the future we're talking about, not the world we live in now. So in the meantime, I think something else the ace community can do is be a little more strategic about how we educate others. One approach is that sex-favorable or sex-neutral aces who are able and willing to go into the details of asexuality and sexual attraction can take on some of that burden from sex-repulsed aces who may not feel comfortable doing so. That'll help make sure the information is still getting out there, but not at the expense of people who feel really awful having to talk about sex. Because I'm not sex repulsed, I tell people that I'm willing to answer questions about asexuality, even the really awkward ones, because it just isn't that big a deal for me. And if it'll help someone have a better understanding of any other aces they may encounter in the future, then I am all about that. Another thing aces can do is get into the habit of sharing resources when we come out. That way we can get around having to talk about sex by letting someone else do it for us. Someone who volunteered their time to create educational materials for that exact purpose. That was actually one of the biggest things that motivated me to start vlogging about asexuality on this channel. I wanted some quick and easy links that I could send to people if I came out to them as ace and they had never heard of it. And finally, we aces should never feel obligated to get personal when we're educating others about asexuality, no matter how much we're pressured into doing so. The way I like to approach it is that if someone asks me a really inappropriate question, I respond by talking about the ace community as a whole rather than myself. For example, if someone asked me, "Do you have a libido?" I would say some aces have a libido, others don't, and explain how libido is different from sexual attraction. Whether I personally have a libido is none of their business, so there's no reason to tell them that. And if they push, I would just push back and say, that's private information that I choose when to share, and right now I'm choosing not to. For all my fellow aces who experience the same frustration that we can't get people to understand our orientation without having to talk about sex, I hope someday we get to experience a world where that's no longer the case, where people have good enough sex ed that they actually know what asexuality is. And now is where I want to hear from you. Do you have to explain your asexuality when you come out? Do those explanations ever feel uncomfortable because you have to talk about sex to make things clear? Have you ever been disbelieved or invalidated or asked inappropriate questions? Do you have any ideas about how to make this better? And whether you're ace or not, what questions do you have about all this? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person. I have cosplay music videos, makeup tutorials, pre and post testosterone voice recordings, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you on the next one.